Okay. Are we ready here in this room now? Everybody's here? Okay. Okay. Dann sagen Sie mal was.
Okay. Vielen Dank. So, sehr geehrte Damen und Herren, herzlich willkommen zur ersten Nichtprüfung als Großveranstaltung hier auf dem Campus der Uni Hohenheim. Danke, dass Sie alle gekommen sind. Danke, dass Sie alle so kooperativ sind bei diesen Maßnahmen, die wir jetzt mittlerweile einhalten müssen. Dementsprechend, ich möchte mich nicht lange aufhalten. Es ist nur das arbeitsrechtlich gewichtigste Thema des 21. Jahrhunderts, die menschliche Notdurft. Und zwar, wir haben das jetzt gerade nur in 3 Reihen. Falls jemand, der in der Mitte sitzt, auf die Toilette gehen möchte nachher oder während der Veranstaltung, bitte ich Sie, von außen einmal aufzustehen und sich auf entweder die Pfeile, die Sie in der Mitte sehen, oder an diese markierten Kreuze an der Seite zu stellen, sodass die andere Person durch kann und immer ein Mindestabstand von 1,50 Meter gewährt ist. Ja, genauso wichtig war das Ganze auch. Ich wünsche Ihnen ganz viel Spaß bei der Veranstaltung und von unserer Seite aus viel Erfolg, viel Spaß. Bitte schön.
Danke sehr. Okay. A great thanks to the hygiene heavies here, who actually make it possible that we can have this event here in Hohenheim more or less live. So I welcome everyone here in the room, but also on the YouTube channels in our WUFA application to the Tropentag 2020, which is organized by ATSAF. I'm the chairman of ATSAF, and I'm really happy that we were able to make this event happen despite the pandemic, despite all the restrictions we have at the moment. We are still able to bring together a network of, I just looked into WUFA, of more than 690 participants who are interested in this conference. And I think this is a big success in these times of crisis. And I'm very happy that in the end, we decided not to postpone the Tropentag, that we decided to be here to talk to each other and to share our knowledge and our experiences in development-oriented research, as we did so many years already in presence. And I'm very hopeful for the coming Tropentags that we might actually benefit from this kind of event to make our impact even larger than it was before. So having said this, just a few words to ATSAF. ATSAF is the Council for Tropical and Subtropical Agricultural Research. It comprises about 350 members that are forming a network, a global network of players in development-oriented research. There are universities, there are CG centers, there are public and private research organizations, there are journalists, there are medicine, physicians, pediatricians, all kinds of people from different disciplines that join together in the effort of making this world a better place, or at least keeping it a good place. And we are trying to be the hub, an information hub, a network hub, and also a hub or an organization to foster education and training for young scientists and to bring them into network activities. That's what we do. And that's also part of what Tropentag is for, to open up the floor to young scientists, to show them the wide world and also show the wide world what these young scientists are up to. And this can be very, very interesting what these young people are presenting. Our PhD students, even our master students, but also young postdocs are here, now virtually here, and they're presenting their work in many sessions. We have parallel sessions that are organized via the WUFA app, and we have plenary sessions that are organized here in Hohenheim as a presence session in our wonderful lecture hall B1 here, which we can only staff with about 66 people, where there should be 450, but at least there are 66, so it's more than nothing. And we will try to address the topic of this year's Tropentag, which we have food and nutrition security and its resilience to global crisis. And we are not only thinking about the pandemic, we are not only thinking about the global crisis that we have at the moment, but we are also thinking about looming crises such as climate change, population, resource use. There are many aspects that are seen as being critical by many people, and where we need solutions, where we need to discuss, where we have to have ideas, where we have to develop also a way forward maybe. And that's why we decided, since we couldn't have the Tropentag in Prague due to the pandemic, we decided to use this virtual Tropentag to actually start discussing about this issue as such. Not directly discipline-related science, but how do we position ourselves? How do we see it from a disciplinary point when we are working on or with or against global crises? So what is actually the main challenge? Where are the points that we have to address? That's what we wanted to do with this Tropentag. And that's also why we have invited keynotes from different disciplines. I will come back to this. We will have 5 keynotes who are looking at this topic of the Tropentag from their disciplinary point of view and in the direction they are going with their science or with their approaches in the near future. I have a couple of announcements to make here as well. First of all, I would like to thank Prague for agreeing to this virtual Tropentag as well, and for postponing their own Tropentag by 2 years. So Prague is not cancelled. Prague will happen, but in 2022. Until then, hopefully, we can meet again in this wonderful city and these wonderful people there. They keep their topic, and we will basically take it up from there in 2022. Prague was postponed by 2 years because the preparations for the Tropentag in Hohenheim were already so far advanced that we didn't really see how we can postpone this to any other time. And so we decided the next year's Tropentag in Hohenheim will take place as foreseen, and will be a handover to this at the end of this Tropentag. But Prague will be in 2022, so it's not forgotten and it will happen. Another word, as some of you may know, those of you who have visited the Tropentag on a regular basis know that we normally have 12 young people here who are practicing journalism and who actually take the Tropentag as one event to test out if they can stand the pressure, if they can write under pressure, if they can actually produce some content when there is a lot of content to be produced. And so we normally have a very lively group of 12 people here from different parts of the world who try taking photos, writing blogs, and using social media to kind of increase the outreach of Tropentag. This year, this is not possible because these audience too small, travel restrictions don't allow to get these people here, so we cannot do it. And but we thought, okay, we have offered this learning opportunity to many student reporters already. Yeah. More than 100 people have been part of that program, so there must be some journalists now who could actually report from the Tropentag, and we offered it as a chance, but none of them took it up. So what we do now is we ask one of the trainers of the Tropentag to actually help us to have some outreach on the social media platforms, such as the blog. You can see it up here, the Tropentag blog, or on the Facebook page, or on Twitter. Twitter is directly linked, and I think the blog also, into the WUFA platform. So if ever you want to contribute, you're very welcome. The Twitter hashtag is Tropentag 2020. And also the blog is here, and you can have a direct link from the WUFA platform to the blog. You're very welcome to comment, to write, and also to see the products of Ralf Dickerhoff, who is actually reporting as a free journalist and an ASAF member from this virtual Tropentag. So I'm very curious to see what he comes up with. He has absolutely free hand to report about whatever he wants to do. So, and he's actually happy to do so. We were in contact yesterday, and I think it's going to be interesting to see what he does. Another thing I have to announce is that we will have poster awards. That was not so very clear until yesterday. Now it is clear. Every session chair who's sharing a poster session is asked to pick up one poster out of the ones that have been presented and send this ID to info@tropentag.de, and there will be a jury that selects out of these posters that have been the best in each of the sessions. We'll select the 3 best posters for the poster award at the end of the plenary session on Friday. Then you may have noticed that there's no dinner, because a virtual dinner doesn't make any sense. Yeah? You don't get fed by a virtual dinner, and everybody sitting in front of cameras and eating is also not so nice. So we decided not to do a dinner this year. That also has reduced the cost of Tropentag tremendously. But Eric said we can't have a Tropentag without an event. So he organized a music event on Thursday night, and everybody is heartily invited to join that music event. And you will find it on the agenda on Woofer. A final word to Woofer. Woofer is a platform, and the platform is serving to help us meet and to help us organize this Tropentag. There are certain aspects to it. If you are participating and not sitting here in this wonderful lecture hall, but if you're out on the screens, you are seeing Woofer via a link of the YouTube channels. If you want to interact, and we really warmly invite you to interact, you need to open the session on Woofer and go to questions and answers. There is a tab, questions and answers. And only these tabs, only the question and answer tab will end up here in the lecture hall. So if you have questions that you would like to ask to the presenters, go to questions and answers in the respective session and ask your questions there. Do not use the chat function. Chat function will not reach us. The chat function will reach all kinds of people, but not the sessions. So I think I worked through my list, and I'm almost in time. I have the pleasure to announce a couple of keynotes. Today's keynotes, the first one will be given by a pediatrician, Professor Dr. Rainer Sauerborn. I will introduce him in a moment. And the second one will be given by a nutritionist, Professor Dr. Helen Young. The other keynotes on Friday will be given by an ecologist, by an economist, and by a climate scientist, or I think so. We can call him a climate scientist. So we have very different disciplines, yeah? And all of them are working on the same title. And the title is, as we said already, Food and Nutrition Security and its Resilience to Global Crisis. So the first speaker today will be Professor Dr. Rainer Sauerborn. He has been the head of the Institute of Public Health in Heidelberg University Hospital since 1997. So he has been in the job for a long time. He also holds a visiting professorship for global health and climate change at the Umeå University in Sweden. And he has completed his medical training as a pediatrician in Bonn, Heidelberg, and London. After this, he did research at the Harvard School of Public Health and at Tufts University in Boston. And in the early 1980s, Rainer Sauerborn spent 3 years as a district medical officer in Nuna, which is in Burkina Faso. And since then, he has numerous research projects linked to that particular country and also this particular region. He is also a member of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, and I asked him to give us a keynote out of his perspective, particularly with his work in Africa, in Burkina Faso, where he is researching the effects of lean season on child nutrition. And I think he has some interesting things to say. Unfortunately, because he broke his leg, he cannot move from Heidelberg to Hohenheim, but he is here virtually with us. And Rainer, I see you have already started your video. I'm stopping now the screen here, and you can share yours with us, and you're welcome to give your keynote.
Thank you very much. Do you hear me,
yes.
Volker? Do you hear
yes.
me? Is it the right screen you're seeing?
Wonderful. I see you, but not your presentation yet.
Not my presentation yet. So what do we do? Share. There we go. Now?
Swap the
better?
screen. Swap your screen.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Yeah. Can I go?
Yes. Floor is yours.
Good. Okay, well, in the background behind me, you see my little home in Nuna, Burkina Faso. So I'm not unfortunately there, but at home with a broken ankle. Thank you for inviting me to this virtual Tropentag. I admire you for doing this and having 660 participants. This is really something we also can learn from. The topic I want to share with you today is strategies to protect child nutrition from climate change. And the word strategies is really the focus. I don't want to talk only about impacts. This is worse than without climate change, and this has a negative impact. But on how do we cope? How do we adapt to it? So a positive note, if you like. My key messages, usually that's at the end, but I do it at the beginning and the end, is climate change is ongoing today. I don't reveal a secret here, but many people think it's in the future, at the end of the century, 2050 and so forth. And here's a map that reminds you, a world heat map that reminds you that in the past decade, from 2006 to 15, we already have up to 3 degrees of warming. And in Germany, if you want to look at it, on Central Europe, it is, well, it is between 1 and 2 degrees, depending on where you are. So Prague and Hohenheim are probably here. So it's ongoing. It's not something in the future that has to be predicted by models. You can see it, feel it, and measure it already today. I'm sorry. So, and all dimension of climate change, whether it's temperature, whether it's rainfall regimes, whether it's ocean warming and rising, all of them have an impact on nutrition and on food production. I will go through the different pathways in a second. So it's not only heat or not only rainfall or whatever. Mitigation and climate terms is, of course, preventing, in the language of a pediatrician, preventing, making sure it doesn't happen, climate change. And if we did the counterfactual without climate change, a word without climate change would have 25 million stunted, meaning chronically unnourished children less. So it's an enormous focus that we should put on mitigation, but this talk is about adaptation. What can we do given that it's already there? And of course, we don't want it to be much worse than it is already. So these adaptation solutions exist. Some have to be developed, and I will go to this. There are some experimental ones, but there's a long list of tested interventions that you can do, and they can be broken down in these 4 dimensions or areas. Agricultural management, and you are in Hohenheim, you are the key players here, one of the key players. Nutritional interventions, food policies, and health interventions. And you will see how this all fits together. The next slide, please. Relax. It's very busy, but I can't really simplify this. Let me take you through it. So you have here climate gases, greenhouse gases, and then you have nutritional health consequences. And in between are the pathways. And if you want some structure here, to the right, you have the impact on fisheries, in the middle, livestock, and to the left on crops. And I will only talk about crops today. It's much too much, and I'm not very good at fisheries and livestock at all. But crops is the main impact of climate change on nutrition. And you see here the various incarnations of climate change: temperature increase, rainfall variability, extreme weather events, increased CO2, ozone levels, and then the ocean is here. Then you see this arrow here, which goes to diarrhea and infectious diseases. So that's, nutritional status is not only what you eat, it's also what you lose in terms of energy and calories, and that goes in any infectious disease. You lose energy content and calories, particularly when you have diarrhea. So that's this one. And here is kind of an economic impact, works through the economy, lower GDP growth, lower purchasing power. You cannot buy as much food as you wished, particularly for vulnerable populations. And here is the one that I'm talking most about. It has an effect on an abiotic effect on crop yields, more pests, pollinator decline, lower human labor capacity. It has been shown that the farmer who's exposed to heat cannot give his full work capacity because he is suffering from physiological effects of heat. He cannot work harder because it's getting too hot. something that some of you may not know is that CO2 has a direct effect in itself. It lowers the micronutrient content of crops, and I'll show you a slide later. That's an important effect, because, as we know, hidden hunger, and this is largely due to micronutrients and not calories and protein and fat. And we have greater post-harvest losses. So it's as if all this conjures to make food production less, and to make child nutrition and put it in danger. Okay, so and we can leave this busy slide. And here is this very well-known Nature publication where he shows that CO2, for the first time, it was shown that CO2 has a direct effect, not only through heat and rainfall. It works on the plants. Here's wheat, rice, peas, soybeans, maize, and sorghum, and you see how this is reduced as the percentage change of CO2 is happening. So that is all I want to say about impact. And now we delve into the strategies. And I give some examples from our own research or from our research with other groups. So agriculture, one focus, and I don't have to lecture you on this, you are the masters of the issue of food crop varieties that are more drought resistant, that are high yield, fast maturation, because rainy season can shrink, and they better mature while it's raining, and more pest resistant. So that is for some, it's already solved. For some, the world is doing research on this. Of course, the GMO question looms, but I'm not getting into this today. Home gardening, very important, because of this zinc and iron and protein reduction as a function of CO2. Yeah, so a lot of projects are trying now to grow food that are not sensitive to CO2, but produce these micronutrients. Agricultural management is also bringing colds to Newcastle. You know it better than anybody else. Water retention, the famous Zai in West Africa, where you lift about a square meter, you lift the borders so that the water is not rushing away after a strong rainfall. Intercropping, of course, beans plus maize, and there are various synergies. Inputs, pesticides, fertilizer, this is of course something we should carefully test for these areas, and crop waste reduction. So this is nothing new, or there's already a lot of solutions there, which should be accelerated given climate change. Weather-based crop insurance, maybe not so much known by many of you, which is if there is a weather signal, for example, there's a mini drought, all of a sudden 3 weeks, no rainfall in the middle of the rainy season, then crop insurance kicks in. So the weather signal defines what the farmer who is enrolled gets in terms of food or in terms of money. We have a little project on this to see whether one weather signal for the entire country makes sense, and we think it doesn't, but that's another story. The micro monitoring of crop growth is something that we are trying to push forward. What you see on the right-hand side, and by the way, this is Isabel Karst working with us. She has a poster on this in the Tropentag, and she was the first author of our paper here. So what you see is a village in the middle. This is a village. And you see the fields, some fields, not all of them. You see some fields where we weighed the food that was harvested, not the food, the crops that was harvested, that were harvested. And then we compared this to the remotely sensed. And Isabel Karst is a remote sensor. And so algorithms, and you see here, sorghum, beans, maize, millet, and depending on the color, you see some intercropping. for example, here, and you see the amount that the satellite predicts, or Isabel predicts, will be harvested on that field. So it's a wonderful free source. If you know the algorithms, it's a satellite that doesn't cost anything, Sentinel-2. Okay, so this is some innovation, but the other ones, and the insurance is also not extremely new, but it's now very urgent to implement this. We also showed, I had said I didn't want to talk too much about the dire predictions, but one of our team, Christine Belesova, she modeled the empirical data from Nuna with PIC, the Potsdam Institute for Climate Impact Research, and found that the days where the food crop productivity index, or the years where the food crop productivity index is below normal, which is 100%, this line, will increase based on climate impact models. So that is a wonderful link between empirical data and modeled projected data. So that is impact, but all the rest of my talk is about strategies of adaptation. Nutrition, home gardens, I mentioned that. This is a picture of Sabine Gabrisch, who's now a professor of climate change and health at PIC and Charité. She gave a talk in Hohenheim 2 years ago, if I'm not mistaken, on her farm project, which is just about what I said, making sure that here in Bangladesh, women grow food that are really especially rich in micronutrients for children. Substitution fortification, the nutritionists among you, this is an old hat, but it is now has to be focused on these micronutrients that will be lacking from climate change impacts. Birth weight is not registered everywhere. For example, in Nuna, maybe 30% of women don't know what their children weigh, their babies weigh at birth, although this is the most important indicator for life. So we need to get hold of birth weight. We need to then monitor the kids in terms of their weight and development to filter out those who are really at high risk. And undernourished children have a much higher multiple risk of dying than well-fed children. Emergency food aid internally, distribution of food, or external is needed, ideally based on early warning systems, and the algorithms, the remote sensing algorithm can predict harvest 3 months before the harvest. So that would give it a nice lead time for action. Okay, policy. We are talking about research, which is also a policy, if you like, on improved food crop varieties that meet the bill of climate change, if you like. Pricing subsidies, the political scientists or experts among you know that this is so important to give price signals and also to subsidize input, seeds, and food. And I mentioned already the weather indexed crop insurance. Now, cool roofs, you may think now he's really getting mad, but this is absolutely fantastic pioneering work that colleagues of mine have done. The idea is, if it's hot at night, and those who have lived in tropical countries know, the worst thing if you can't sleep because of heat at night, and it gets so warm there that this happens, and in the morning the whole day is you have a diminished work capacity, and that's crucial for farmers not to have that diminished. So can we cool the roofs or the huts can we cool the huts? Of course, no air conditioning, this is absolutely out of the question. The solution could be, as you see on the bottom here, to put some coating. It's quite a sophisticated chemical product, not like white paint, but it's both insulating and reflecting sunlight. And we have with Bernighausen, my successor. I'm no longer the head of the institute, by the way, but I'm very happy that I have a very excellent one. Till Berninghausen and Aditi Bankar. They do an intervention study to see how many degrees this will lower the temperature, and what about the heart rate, the blood pressure, and work capacity. So this is not only a pipe dream, it may be a very important solution. So I wanted to sprinkle in my talk at least some things that are new to you, maybe. So health, often forgotten, but it shouldn't be forgotten, because a healthy child is also a well-nourished child if they get reasonably enough food. Immunization against the diarrheal causing viruses, for example, measles is terrible for nutritional status, so is pertussis. Diarrhea management, so kids should be rehydrated. If there's any bacteria, they should be treated. Intermittent preventive treatment of malaria. If you don't have it, you are born with a low birth weight, and the whole story starts already at birth. But there's also this program for infants below 1 year, some countries below 3 years. So treating malaria on a regular basis without testing, this is called intermittent preventive treatment, is a strategy against malnutrition of children. Exclusive breastfeeding, well, that's not very new. And as I said, birth weight is a risk factor. We studied data from this Nuna place where I work a lot, and you see this was a year with a very bad harvest, and you see that the discrepancy of deaths between children when they had this bad year at the year of birth compared to a better year. Treatment of acute undernutrition, family planning. Yes, you know that closely spaced births are not very good for your health. Access to healthcare is important. And here are my key messages again. Climate change is ongoing. All dimensions of climate change influence through all these pathways child nutrition. Mitigation would save, sorry, that should be 25 million, not 125 children. So mitigation is key, but today we talk about adaptation, and there are 4 strategies on agriculture, on nutrition, on policy, and on health. And with this, I thank you. And I don't know whether there's discussion. Volkert will tell us. Thank you very much indeed. I stopped screen sharing. Yep.
Yes, thank you, Rainer. There was just a big applause for you here. I don't know if you can hear it.
I hear the roaring applause. Yes, thank you.
Thank you very much. Actually, that was a very interesting start of the Tropentag. We never really had such a viewpoint of starting a Tropentag. Normally it's like politics and complicated research decisions. I like that a lot. It was a very good overview in my point of view. There are questions, but unfortunately they were not asked where they should have been asked. So there is one comment here on your slide on impact. It is from Peters. Rather a comment to Rainer's slide on impact. As planted forages are also crops, a lot of the impact stated for field crops such as pollination and seed production, diseases and so on may also apply. Some for excess water, tolerance to drought, and so on. Insurance schemes for livestock also critical. More so, a large part of livestock production is feed production. So I think this is really a comment where Michael tried to widen the field. Do you want to comment on that comment?
Well, agree with everything. Forests will also suffer from lack of pollination. I'm not an expert on this field. And of course, what was the other topic? The forest, the livestock. Yeah, of course, we grow a lot of food to feed animals, particularly, pigs and chicken. And this is, of course, this is all interwoven. But I said in the beginning that I cannot and don't want to focus on livestock and, of course, the links which you rightly point out. So it's a very good comment. That these food production, I don't know what's the percentage for that. I would guess that at least 30% of the food is given to animals. And that's a big problem, the competition between humans and animals, because we eat meat, so we should not eat meat. We all know that.
I think the percentage is actually quite higher. More like 50 or 60%, actually.
Is that so? Wow.
I think so.
Thank you.
I'm not an expert, but I think so. Yeah, but the experts are nodding here. So yes, 50 to 60% of crops grown are actually fed to animals. There was another question which I cannot find again, but I remember roughly what it was. It said basically that there is no proven evidence yet that home gardening or the presence of home garden is actually changing dietary inputs. And I don't know what exactly the question was, but it was in the direction. So what is your take on that? And what kind of evidence do you have that having home gardens actually changes diets?
Okay, well, the person is correct. And the evidence is, until recently, I must say, thin, but we have two large intervention studies. One is by Sabine Gabrisch, I mentioned that already. The project is called FARM with double A, and you can look it up in the internet. And if you look Sabine Gabrisch with Y, she has started to publish. Of course, there's always the delay. She has started this project 5 years ago, and now the first, it's a randomized controlled trial, rigorous epidemiology, and my new collaborator, the junior professor Ina Dankwa, she's doing also a randomized controlled trial with a slightly different slant. So this will come in, this results will come in. There's one publication on Burkina Faso, the author I cannot remember now, but if you look into this, that trial was published, and this the Bangladesh trial is being published in a sequence of papers, and the trial in Nuna is just being set up. It's in Nuna and in Kenya. The evidence will come in, and what I know from Sabine, this is indeed changing not only dietary behavior, but also nutritional status, which is the gold standard, of course.
Okay, thank you for that. We have one question from the audience here in Hohenheim. I pass on the microphone to Misek Chakunda.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much for that talk. So one of the strategies you mentioned was intermittent treatment for malaria.
Yes.
My question on that is, we know from the past that there has been a lot of reports on drug resistance to malaria. Is there a trade-off there?
You're right to be worried about this. Let me see. Do you see that slide? Oh, you remember the slide. Well, of course, there are many preventive treatment with antibiotics, which always make me worried about resistance. For example, against trachoma, there's a treatment. But here we have, of course, in malaria, we are all over the place with resistance. They use sulfadoxine pyrimethamine, which is a very old drug, and there are resistances to this. And it's not like you treat somebody who's sick. So even if you have 10% of resistances, then it will have an effect on the broad child population. Now, the WHO, if you look up WHO website, they will give guidelines for countries which have a high level of resistance to this combination, and they have different regimes. So it's different country by country. In principle, you are right. This is given 3 times a year. And yeah, depending on the resistance situation in the country, this may or may not work. Sulfadoxine pyrimethamine is on the market since, it's Fansidar. It's in the market since decades. So there's not much change in resistance there. Of course, there's resistance. It's not a first-line anti-malarial drug. If it were, I would be much more worried. So the first-line drugs are left for treatment. This is for, it's a funny thing, it's called preventative treatment, you know. Okay. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you very much. Just to inform Helen Young, we take 2 more questions and then it's your turn. I will come back to you in a few seconds. There's a question here from Regina Birner and I have 1 more online question here. Regina, please.
Yeah, thank you for this excellent presentation. May I ask you to speculate how will COVID-19, the current crisis, affect what you presented to us? Will it make everything worse because we have negative effects on nutrition, or could it maybe also raise some awareness on paying more attention to nutrition? Do you have some thoughts on that?
Well, thank you for that question. And of course, there's a link between COVID and climate change in many aspects of policy, anticipating preparedness and so forth. But your question was directed on the link between COVID and nutrition. From what I know firsthand from our partners in Kenya, this is at the borders of Lake Victoria, and Nuna, which is landlocked in West Africa, and any interdiction of circulation of people and goods, of course, is a disaster because people cannot go to the markets, they cannot buy food. So this is mainly on the market. The marketed food is affected. Of course, the farmers, it's now rainy season in both countries. The farmers go to the fields, but then they may have a problem in selling their sorghum. So I think it's this link. I'm not aware of any direct effect. I mean, it's not like so many people are COVID stricken that they cannot go and farm, or that it's just thank God a very small population of percentage of the population. But if you have policy measures like lockdown, then you get into trouble, and that's one of the collateral damages of lockdown. And there are many, and I think you have that in mind when you ask that question.
Thank you, Rainer. And the final question for this session is, it's a bit weird, you know. Normally I'm offended if people look into their mobile phones in lectures all the time, but I don't have a choice here. So my colleague Thomas Hilger here from Hohenheim has asked, micronutrient fortification of crops need a lot of inputs. How can we handle that when farmers are poor?
Did you say micronutrient?
Yeah, Mike, you were reporting on zinc and
I got it.
Micronutrient fortification, no. Yes.
Thank you. My issue, or my suggestion was not was not on the main cereal, of course, but on legumes and vegetables. And I'm not an expert in the field. I only read these papers, and I know that these studies are underway. So all the projects that I know try to use local food. It's not that you have to put some chemicals, sort of fertilize the ground with zinc or with iron. These products, these plants have a high content and are not sensitive to CO2 as far as I understand, but I stand to be corrected if you know differently. So it's not that they don't have to pay anything or buy some fancy stuff. If you take pills, of course, if somebody had said, okay, why don't you take some vitamin and zinc and iron pills? That is, of course, a different story. That should be reserved to pregnant women, you know, iron and folate acid and so forth. Did I answer your question?
I think so.
It's a remotely asked question. Okay.
If not, then Thomas can still come back to you. That is also what I would like to ask you, if you don't mind, to look into WUFA maybe over the next 2 days from time to time and see if there are questions that you actually might want to respond to, because these questions will be online for a longer time, and there may be also discussions going on in which you might want to join. And also, it is possible that our journalist, Ralf Dickerhoff, may contact you for some further clarifications. But for now, I thank you very much for your presentation, for your input, and also for your patience in answering these questions. Just imagine a very big hand of 640 people. We can do here a little bit, so thank you very much.
Thank you. I hear the entire internet is reverberating with applause. Thank you so much for inviting me. It was
wonderful. Yes, thank you, Rainer. So with a little bit of a delay, but not too much, I hope, we continue here in our session, and I see already online our next speaker, Helen Young. Welcome. Helen is on the back side of this thing here. Okay. Helen is research director at the Feinstein International Center of Tufts University in Boston, USA. Since she joined in 1997, she has directed research programs on nutrition, livelihoods, and conflicts. So she's very much in the center of the topic of our Tropentag. She has successfully led several multi-year operational research programs in Africa, especially in Sudan, Chad, and Kenya. She's promoting interdisciplinary studies on pastoralism and building resilience of people in conflict-affected regions. So she's a very broadly acting researcher, and she now leads 2 programs on persistent global acute malnutrition in Africa's drylands. So here we have a direct link to Rainer's talk before. Helen has been the co-editor of the journal Disaster since 1997 and is on the editorial board of Food and Nutrition Bulletin. So I think she really is an expert in her field, and I'm very happy that she joins us here today for her talk. And Helen, I would like you to share your screen now with us so that you can give your presentation.
Okay, thank you. Let me just do that.
You always have to imagine a big hand of applause, yeah? We can't really bring it across.
Oh, just a minute, sorry.
No problem, we are here.
I must first share my screen before I bring up my video.
Yeah, we see your screen.
Okay, great. Then I will move over to my presentation.
Yes, please. Wonderful.
Fantastic.
Yes, it is. So the floor is yours. We're looking forward to your presentation.
Great. Thank you very much. And especially thank you for the opportunity to join you at Tropentag 2020. Very much a new experience for me to be presenting online in this way. And so, yes, I appreciate your patience. So I will be talking about the problem of recurring rates of high childhood acute malnutrition, which is one of the main challenges of our time. Globally, the UN agencies recently estimated there are 50 million, or 77.3% of all children globally are wasted or suffering acute malnutrition. And I will be arguing that a better understanding of the resilience of dryland communities can help in analysing the drivers of malnutrition and thereby be used to promote food and nutrition security. So first of all, a little bit of background on the problem of what we call persistent global acute malnutrition. Well, first of all, what is persistent global acute malnutrition? As I mentioned, it's essentially where high rates of wasting are occurring over years and decades. And when we say high rates, in order to judge whether they're high or not, we use the universal emergency benchmark of 15% weight for height based on the WHO growth standards, which is widely endorsed internationally. Anyway, what we are seeing, apart from these huge numbers, is that wasting rates are often static or increasing despite improvements in other areas such as food security. And this is causing concern. And in response to this, from a policy perspective, there have been major policy shifts with a recent global action plan on childhood wasting that was published earlier this year, which was a collective effort developed by WHO, FAO, UNICEF, WFP and UNHCR, which gives you some idea of the seriousness of the problem. I should also say that where these recurring rates are often seen, humanitarian programs have been in almost continuous operation, in some cases for more than 2 decades. I thought I'd share with you some views from the front line, from professionals that we interviewed as part of that study I put up earlier on persistent global acute malnutrition. These are some of the quotes from senior professionals working for regional government, UN agencies, INGOs, and local academics. So for example, a whole group of countries where GAM is persistently high: South Sudan, South and Central Somalia, Sahelian West Africa. Even in a good year, we still have high levels of malnutrition: Mauritania, Mali, Niger, and Senegal. We don't really see a drop in GAM, even though we've been intervening for years. At the bottom, the donors are reflecting that it feels like we never pull out. So views were shared with us in our review of the problem. Sorry, forgive me one moment. So the focus so far has been on the problem globally, but in our review of persistent global malnutrition, we noticed that it was particularly prevalent in dryland regions, especially across the Sahel and the Horn of Africa, where countries were frequently mentioned as suffering this particular problem by our key informants. So we had, in more recent work, we've been focusing on the particular issue of malnutrition in drylands. And what we discovered, what was particularly evident, was that while an understanding of seasonality and the non-equilibrium paradigm, while that's common knowledge among many dryland agriculture and pastoralism experts, this understanding is not necessarily universal, and many misperceptions persist about drylands. For example, something as simple as seasons and seasonality. We all have a sense of these in our own lives and in our own environments. But when we are talking about dryland regions in Africa, they're frequently poorly understood. For example, sometimes we see they are often translated into their English equivalents. Summer is often the hot, dry season, but it's not followed by a harvest. Rather, the harvest is just before the summer. So this use of English terms for seasons in Africa is very confusing and tells us little or nothing about their characteristics. A further problem is that seasons are often presented in binary terms: rainy season, dry season, or perhaps pre and post harvest. In our work on looking at seasonality of malnutrition, we were particularly interested in community perceptions of seasonality. And what we found from the qualitative work was that communities often share similar perceptions of seasons, despite them being from widely different, from different countries or different areas within their own countries. So here I have a graphic showing the seasons as described by focus groups across the region of Darfur. And this region is the size of France, so it's not small by any means. And we're talking about 70 focus groups, so quite extensive field work. We found that similar terms were used for 5 different seasons that were identified by our groups, starting at the beginning of the year with Rushash, which is the start of the light rains at the end of a long, hot, dry season. This is followed by the more established rains known as Harif, which then go into Deret, the end of the rains and the beginning of the dry season, followed by the cool, dry season known as Shita, and which then goes into the hot, dry season. Now, we found similar terminology also in our qualitative work in Chad. Linked with this was a shared perceptions of variability, resource variability, and also resource gradients, of course, across the Sahel from south to north with a decreasing rainfall and vegetation on a seasonal basis. This is important because this identifies complexity and an understanding of seasonality that goes far beyond the binary wet versus dry season. Until recently, it was widely assumed that the seasonal changes in nutritional status broadly followed or coincided with the hunger gap. So the hunger gap is a time of food insecurity, but it's also a time of increased incidence of rainy season diseases, for example, such as malaria and diarrheal disease. Actually, there should not be an arrow between food insecurity and rainy season diseases. That should really be a plus sign, because food insecurity is here. We want to show that these two factors or two drivers are assumed to lead to an increase in malnutrition. Now, this is reflected across a wide literature, and it feels a little unfair to pull out one example, but this is a very authoritative example to give you a sense of this widely held assumption. To quote, estimates of wasting prevalence can vary across seasons. They are commonly at their highest during the rainy season, often coincided with the pre-harvest period, and thus with food scarcity, as well as higher rates of diseases, including diarrhea and malaria. However, in our own work and analysis of seasonality, we found very different patterns. So this particular analysis was based on a total of 350 SMART surveys, the surveys that are commonly done by agencies during protracted or ongoing humanitarian crises, but they're also done in non-emergency contexts. We took these 350 surveys are from 3 countries, Chad, Sudan, and South Sudan, and particular regions within those countries. And we calculated the mean rate of child wasting for each month and plotted 3 separate graphs. What this revealed was essentially 2 peaks of wasting in each country. As you will see, the first major and larger peak occurs around mid-May, that first peak that you can see in each of the graphs. However, there is a slight variability in timing because the start date of the rains varies varies slightly according to these countries, but also within countries can vary. This peak is followed by a slight improvement in acute malnutrition, and then a secondary but much smaller peak after the lean season or hunger gap. The second smaller peak corresponds to the end of the rains, but also low temperature and high vegetation. These are very different conditions from the first peak that's at the end of the hot, dry season and beginning of the rains. And this might suggest there are a different set of drivers, but I'll come back to that later. We also undertook qualitative studies in Sudan and Chad, and these confirm the seasonal pattern. We looked at local perceptions that identified the same late dry season and early rains as the period when malnutrition is at its worst. And other studies since ours have confirmed this. In reviewing the literature, we note earlier anthropological studies in both East and West Africa, particularly those focusing on pastoralists, have similarly identified this period as particularly challenging from the perspective of both dryland pastoralists, but also agro-pastoralists. This data also confirms something I personally witnessed, but have not read about during my time as a field nutritionist in the 80s. And that is when we found very high levels of acute malnutrition around, during the hunger cap, we also saw a rapid recovery and reduction in acute malnutrition immediately afterwards, which was, quite frankly, at that time, astonishing. So let me tell you a bit more about this study, which is called Twin Peaks, the Seasonality of Acute Malnutrition, Conflict and Environmental Factors. First of all, it was done in collaboration with FAO and included an analysis of the relationship between nutritional outcomes and a range of data. As I mentioned, the nutritional data was from the SMART surveys, but we also used online data that is readily available free of charge. So remote sensing data, including precipitation, temperature, normalized difference vegetation index, or NDVI. We also downloaded data from the Armed Conflict Location and Event Data, ACLED, and on disasters from the Emergency Event Database, dating back to 1993 to look at the relationship between disasters and conflict and our nutritional data. Plus, we had data from GPS tracking of livestock herds to understand this, to get a better understanding of livelihoods, and qualitative data, as I mentioned, from focus groups, key informant interviews, and case study interviews. Just 2 very quick graphs to show that we also found a distinct seasonality of conflict. But what was interesting was that when we separated out the farmer-herder conflict, we found a very different pattern from the seasonality of all violent events. Now, I'll just put that out there as a teaser and refer you to the report if you want to understand more about what's driving those relationships, because I think they're very important and there's little time now. The important thing I did want to mention is that when we put all the data together, harmonic regression, which allowed us to account for within-year seasonality on mean survey, on the mean nutritional status, with several of those independent variables I mentioned earlier. What we found was that within-year seasonality had some of the greatest explanatory power in terms of both mean weight for height and also the prevalence, which is not surprising when you look at those graphs, but it's good to have it confirmed. Importantly, we also found that NDVI and temperature were also shown to be significantly correlated with nutritional status, with the higher NDVI, so vegetation, associated with better nutritional status, but the higher temperature associated with much worse nutritional status. And as you know, the highest temperature occurs during that, just before that recherche period, prior to the rainy season, during the hot season. Third, of our disaster-related variables, the only variable that is consistently correlated with wasting is conflict. The more conflict events in any year, the higher the prevalence of wasting. Now, our variables altogether explained about 1/3 the variation in GAM, or one global acute malnutrition. Now, that might seem small, but it's actually much higher than the R² observed in most nutritional household level surveys. And so we conclude that it indicates a strong role of environment, but also the value of using this secondary region-wide data in order to examine these causal relations or these associations between variables. After we looked at the quantitative work, we looked at some of our qualitative perspectives. And as I mentioned earlier, these chimed very much with the twin peaks, which we've superimposed on this graphic. Although what it also showed was that, or what our analysis also pointed to, was that it's the seasonality of livelihood systems linked with environmental variability, which are the crucial determinants or drivers of these causes of malnutrition and determinants of the twin peaks. And it's through their impact on the underlying causes of malnutrition related to food security, care, and health. And I'll say more about that in a minute. Just a few words to say about livelihoods that we think are important. And that is, from a drylands perspective, we understand that livelihood systems, dryland livelihood systems, are often specializations, meaning that they have adapted over centuries to take advantage of dryland resources and to manage the spatial and temporal variability of drylands. And what I mean by management, an example might be the mobility of pastoralist herds, which enables them to take advantage of seasonal resources that are geographically dispersed. Now, while this adaptation, this historic adaptation, underpins resilience of dryland systems, our qualitative work, particularly historical timelines, show that over the past 50 years, communities have simultaneously been experiencing a series of multiple and overlapping hazardous events, such as the extended droughts and famine, particularly the one in the 80s, which was combined with rinderpest epidemics, which devastated livestock herds. More recently, I think we've all heard about the wide-ranging conflicts in this region, many of which are persistent, which combined with insecurity have had a major impact on mobility patterns, access to markets and livelihoods generally. Another factor is, of course, climate change. And herders are reporting increasing temperatures and the difficulties they have in dealing with them. One of their coping strategies is to resort to more nighttime grazing, many of which is organized around herd self-herding. and also reduced frequency of watering. So herders are struggling to deal with what they very much perceive as increasing temperatures. Now, as a result of this work, we would argue that, as I mentioned earlier, in a drylands context, an understanding of livelihoods and seasonality is vital, central even, to understanding the drivers of acute malnutrition in finding solutions to this problem. Now, obviously, there are multiple implications from the work for research and also for policy and practice. I cannot focus on them all here today, but the issue I would like to focus on is the need for reviewing, updating, and revising our conceptual framework of the drivers of malnutrition. Now, this isn't something that can be done just by a group of academics working alone. So the first thing that we tried to do is highlight the problem of recurring rates of childhood acute malnutrition, especially in parts of Africa, but also started to identify the factors that are frequently overlooked or not routinely considered or misunderstood that we have shown are important, such as environment and seasonality, systems and institutions, and livelihood systems. Now, the starting point for revising a conceptual framework, our starting point is what is a malnutrition causal framework that has been around in practical and policy use since the 90s. And it was first published developed and published by UNICEF in 1990 as part of their strategy for improved nutrition of children and women in developing countries. What you can see here are the multiple levels. At the top, we have the manifestations, and then we have 3 levels of causality. The immediate causes affecting the individual child relating to food intake and disease, the underlying causes relating to food security, care, which is described as maternal and child care. We can also think of the social and care environment, and the health cluster of causes related to access to health services and wider public health, the underlying causes and the basic causes, which I'll be talking more about. Now, I should say that the underlying and the immediate causes of malnutrition are well understood, and they've become part of the lingua franca of nutritionists, common knowledge, especially among practitioners, field workers, as well as policymakers. And surprisingly, the framework has changed little since its original inception, but that with one exception, and that is the basic causes, which have received considerably less attention and have been presented in different ways over the decades. Now, our suggested revisions to this framework very much speak to the basic causes, but also trying to reinforce some of the strengths of the underlying and immediate causes, but I'm not going to say too much about that. On the basic causes, we emphasize an understanding of dryland environments, particularly environment and seasonality, climate variability and extremes, and particularly how livelihood systems are affected by that. But of course, livelihood systems are affected by environment and seasonality through formal and informal institutions. Hence the role and importance of these institutions in managing resources, but also in underpinning social norms, rules, and customs, such as gender norms. And they are impacting on livelihood systems, their resilience and vulnerability. And of course, to understand this, we have to understand the history of vulnerability and the long-term trends affecting the resilience of these livelihood systems. So while we have come up with a revision and presented it in this document, what are the next steps for actually promoting commitments and action in relation to these problems? Well, I wanted to let you know that there is a forthcoming technical series on the conceptual framework for addressing acute malnutrition, specifically in Africa's drylands. And Tufts is running this technical series in collaboration with FAO and also with support from those UN agencies who are working, who have developed the Global Action Plan on Wasting. The technical series involves 4 webinar panels whereby we explore the updated framework and have 16 panelists drawn from regional representatives and international representatives from UN agencies and civil society and academia. Through this technical series, we will share some of the recent research that challenges some of our conventional wisdom, and we hope to promote a deeper debate to help us understand these basic drivers, as well as raise issues regarding methodology, ways of working, and our operational approach. And after these 4 events, Tufts University and FAO will again revise and we will be convening a roundtable of high-level donor, UN and regional representatives, where we will be seeking commitments from them to apply and measure the effectiveness of the updated framework in their work. So I'd just like to conclude by encouraging you all to get involved. Please do tune into our webinars, send us your feedback, and please keep in touch with next steps. So thank you again, Tropentag. I very much appreciate this opportunity. Goodbye.
Yes, Helen, thank you very much for this impressive talk and also the impressive work that is behind it. Amazing. I think you heard some of the applause here, I hope, in this small lecture hall. There are some questions online, which I have to find again, because people are addressing the speakers actually in the general welcome address. And so I have to be scouting for these questions, but I found some of them. And there was one question was regarding the seasonal aspects that you were actually talking about. And the question was, how reliable are these seasons in terms of climate change? In other words, since seasons are probably likely to change, to what extent are your findings still valid? Or to what extent maybe you have to do some adjustments?
Okay, so I'll respond to that question. Thank you very much for a really excellent question. I think the nature of this work and the fact that it's interdisciplinary really stresses the fact that we need to collaborate. We need to have multidisciplinary teams, and we need to be addressing these questions such as these. So, for example, as part of our team, we're working with climate scientists, and we have available, and we're also accessing the work that's been done reviewing climate. For example, the rainfall variability over the past 100 years in Sudan. And yeah, in Sudan and Chad both have a unimodal climate, as I described, and in those climates. It's these particular seasons have been consistent. But I am aware in neighboring countries, for example, in Kenya, where there is a bimodal climate and dual rainy seasons, and 2 rainy seasons, there has been many years when there, particularly in the last 15 years, when there particular rainy seasons have completely failed. And so you could argue that the pattern of seasonality in that bimodal climate is changing. But I think we need a long-term perspective. So it's not good enough to look at the last 15 or 20 years. We need to look much longer term. And we also need to bring together the climate data with the local perceptions, because these are the people that are living through and experiencing these climates. And I think it's quite remarkable how many of their perceptions do echo what we see in the science.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. I hope this answered the question. Here's a question from the audience here in Hohenheim. Arndt Feuerbacher has the floor.
Helen, thank you so much for your very interesting talk. I have a very short question. Do you have any measure how the seasonal changes in malnutrition also impact on labor productivity? And also how this is maybe also intertwining with increasing heat stress? Thank you very much.
Thanks very much for the question. Again, very helpful. Yes, this is definitely labour demands on a seasonal basis are having an impact here. In fact, particularly women's work burden and how that changes throughout the year, and the impact of that on child caregiving behaviours is important. This was highlighted in qualitative work in particular, and I think a lot of this is also echoed in the literature. So this period just before the rainy season coincides with the end of a period of high stress for pastures. They're having to water their animals. There is increasing temperatures that they have to deal with that I mentioned, but also the work burden on women is increased and they have less time for childcare. The children are in the care of grandparents or older children, etc. So I think this is a major factor, but we basically need to do more work on this. And I didn't mention any of the methodological issues, but there are challenges to doing longitudinal studies that are required deeply. I hope that answers your question.
He looks very satisfied. I take two more questions, one from Regina Birner here in the audience and another one from the online questions.
Well, thank you for this really fascinating lecture. And what I found particularly intriguing is bringing this issue of conflicts into the picture. You showed a regression analysis where you had the NDVI and the conflicts having an effect on acute malnutrition. And I was wondering, for the NDVI, so a measure of biomass, did you use a lagged variable? Because one would expect that this NDVI doesn't have an immediate effect on malnutrition, but only after the harvest or through the livestock production. And then I would also be quite interested, through your qualitative research, did you find out more how exactly these herder conflicts actually influence the malnutrition, through what effect that actually is? Thank you.
Thanks very much for your question. So on the first question about the NDVI, we did not use any lag. No, we didn't. So that's a simple answer to your question. But also I don't think that we need to, because there is if we look at the data on NDVI, I think you would have to look at the data to see that there is a gradual change in NDVI. And also I should say that we're using NDVI specifically for the regions where the surveys were done. On the second question, which was about conflict, we have not looked directly. We have not had studies that look at how the pathways through which conflict is driving acute malnutrition, but we have looked extensively at the impact of conflict on livelihoods. And so from that, we can hypothesize what those pathways might be, but we've not actually tested any of those hypotheses or looked at them in more detail. I should also say that although we found this significant relationship, I think there is limitations in this analysis, because the ACLED database, we took data from, I think it was 1993, but clearly the database didn't have as many conflict-related events during the first decade as compared to the later years. And I think also bias is introduced because we have more nutrition surveys done, and more in the years when there are many episodes of conflict. For example, the start of the Darfur conflict in 2004, going into 2005. I'd love to talk to you more about it.
Yes, I think there's ample opportunity during this conference to actually meet and discuss and start topics. So you're very welcome to do that. I would like to give the floor to one more question, even though we are running a bit late. But this is, I think, a very nice question to round up both talks, actually, to a certain extent. Here's Joshua Ombaka, who says, thank you, such an insightful work there. Can the speaker, this is you, Helen, comment on the agri-food chain linkages in the area? For areas with good market linkages, would your analysis change, or would the conflict potential of that change? Or I don't know exactly what should change, but probably the nutritional status of the children also, that is linked here. And I would like to add another aspect to the question. if we talk about global crisis, when we link this to this agri-food chain, how does the child relationship change here?
I think it's complex, but if I try and simplify, we see very strong relationships between access to markets and some of those drivers of malnutrition, for example, food security, but also obviously livelihoods. We also see greater transformation of livelihoods, the greater proximity to markets because of the access to a wider range of livelihood strategies, the opportunities for diversification. But on the other hand, other factors might become other drivers. There may be bigger problems with other drivers, particularly around women's work burden, but also around exposure to infectious diseases compared to, say, children whose families are still practicing their traditional livelihood specialization.
Yes, that was a very good summary, I think, a simplification of the complicated question. Thank you very much. So we are coming to an end. Give a large hand to Helen here for her talk. Thank you very much for being with us this morning and giving us this talk and also join these discussions and giving us insightful answers. Thank you very much, Helen. For this, we are coming to an end for the first plenary session of this year's Tropentag. I thank the audience for their patience and their intelligent questions. And I would like to announce that we are here in Hohenheim. We are taking now a coffee break. I would urge everyone out on the screens to do the same. Yeah, move a little bit, get some fresh air into your lungs, and then come back, or maybe also polluted air, depends on your health status, and come back to the plenary session at 14:45, so 15 minutes to 3, when we will see here the awards of Hans Rutenberg Graduate Award and Josef G. Knoll European Science Award. And the chair of the session will be Andrea Fardani, who's already sitting here. And we are looking forward to seeing you all again here in about 20 minutes. Thank you very much. Eric? Eric?
Graduate Award and the Joseph G. Knoll European Science Award. Dear participants of the virtual Tropentag, dear organizers, dear awards winners, and dear members of the jury of the Gutenberg Graduate Award and of the Joseph Knoll European Science Award. Since 1999, the Iselin Foundation, later on the Foundation Fiat Panis, are supporting qualified young graduates by honoring excellent master theses in the field of food security with the Hans Hartwig Gutenberg Graduate Award. The founder of our foundation, Dr. Hermann Iselin, believed that development-oriented scientific research can have a great impact to the improvement of countries with food deficits. And Dr. Iselin was convinced that only a world without hunger will be a peaceful world. Professor Dr. Hans Hartwig Gutenberg was a respected representative in the early years of the international-oriented agriculture research at the University of Hohenheim. 4 years ago, the institute related to tropical agriculture at the University of Hohenheim merged and formed the so-called Hans Gutenberg Institute. The prize is awarded with the total amount of 7,500 euro, which can be divided up to not more than 3 prize winners. All persons can apply for the prize which studied at European universities and graduate successfully with a university diploma or a master degree. An independent scientific jury decides on the award. Let me thank Regina Birner, Ulrike Grote, and Jochen Reif for their intensive work to select the most successful works for this year. The award winners will now present their scientific work, which will be followed by the assessment of a member of our jury, Regina Birner, and the handover of the certificates. And you already are aware of our prize winners this year, but I am sorry that Sina Bierkamp from the Leibniz University of Hanover is ill and will not able to join us, neither prepared a video to have the possibility to present her work. But let me send our wishes for a prompt recovery of Sina. So we are moving to Franziska Steinhübel, who studied at the University of Passau and is actually working at the University of Hohenheim. Franziska, the floor is yours. Which one is this one? F5. Could you make it big? Thank you.
Can you hear me? Do I have to turn this on? Can you hear me now? Okay. Thank you very much. First of all, I would like to express my gratitude to the Foundation Fiat Panis for awarding me with the Hans Hartwig Gutenberg Prize today. And also, since some of the people are even here today due to all the Corona challenges, I also would like to say thank you to everyone for supporting me in and during the process of writing my thesis, which has the following title: Do Indonesian consumers value organic rice? Evidence from a willingness to pay experiment with randomized pricing. So in Indonesia, the government as well as various non-governmental organizations have started to promote organic farming as one sustainable alternative to conventional farming. And while most of the efforts mostly focus on the supply side, the demand side often remains neglected, also in the field of research. And this is why I wanted to contribute to closing this gap and came up with the following research question. Do Indonesian consumers value organic rice, and which factors influence their demand? To analyze this, I conducted an incentive-compatible willingness to pay experiment with urban and semi-urban consumers in Yogyakarta on the island Java. Within the experiment, I opted for the so-called Becker de Groot-Marshak approach, which is based on an auction mechanism. Within the experiment, we used this graphic and also a bit more time to make sure that all respondents actually understood the overall procedure. I hope I can also make it understandable with only a few sentences today. So within the experiment, respondents are asked to submit a price bid to purchase 1 kilogram of certified organic rice. And then only those respondents whose bid is equal or higher than a randomly drawn price can actually purchase the organic rice. And I decided to opt for this approach since it has the advantage that respondents are faced with a real purchase decision and are therefore less prone to misreport their willingness to pay. To further analyze the factors that actually influence the demand of consumers to pay higher prices for organic products, I added a information treatment to the experiment and divided the respondents in 3 groups. Group 1 and Group 2 were shown a short information video on the advantages of organic farming. Group 1 regarding the health aspects of organic farming, Group 2 regarding the environmental aspects of organic farming. Group 3 comprised the control group. Overall, I interviewed 293 respondents who were all randomly selected with the help of local enumerators, and of course the experiment was conducted in Indonesian. To analyze my data, I used a simple linear OLS regression model. When we look at the results, I can say, yes, Indonesian consumers do value organic rice. Within the experiment, on average, the respondents offered a price premium of 20% for certified organic rice compared to the price they usually pay for conventional rice. But when we look here at the demand curve in orange and compare it to the gray line, which illustrates the current level of the market price for certified organic rice, we see that only around half of the respondents offered a price which is equal or higher than the market price. So there's still potential or even need to further raise the demand of consumers. And when we then look at what actually motivates consumers to pay higher prices for organic products, surprisingly, I found out within the frame of my experiment that the information treatment was not statistically significant in raising the willingness to pay of the consumers. And regardless of the treatment, the health aspect seemed to be the main motivation for consumers to purchase organic rice, which is here in the pie chart, the orange part, around 80% of the consumers. So I would like to conclude with the discussion of some policy implications. So on the one hand, one might consider that maybe better conceptualized or more detailed information might be more efficient in actually raising the willingness to pay of consumers. The health channel seems to be a very important channel. Regarding the environmental aspect, I think this might also stem from a general low environmental awareness of consumers. So this could also be something that might be tackled in the future. And when you think about future campaigns to further raise the demand for organic products, within my experiment, I found out that the most promising target group seems to be younger, better educated, and wealthier consumers. Should you have any remaining questions, I'm happy to answer them later during the coffee break. And for now, I would like to say thank you very much for your attention.
Can you hear me? Yeah. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you very much for being here. First of all, I would like to thank the Fiat Panis Foundation for this award. And also I would like to thank Professor Birner and Dr. Thomas Damm, who are also here, for the supervision on this work, which is my master's thesis called The Uberization of Agricultural Mechanization Services, which is based on a case study I conducted in Rajasthan in India. Some years ago, we came across this news in some newspapers that were covering how tractors, how the provision of mechanization services could be maybe improved by some digital tools. So for instance, the New York Times covered this, or some other newspapers as Business Today in India, and they call it somehow the Uberization or the Uber for agriculture. So that caught our interest, and we thought that could be a potential solution for some smallholder farmers, and we decided to analyze this topic. For this, we base our study on the experience of EM3 Agri-Services, which is an Indian company, an Indian startup, which was founded in 2014, and that holds operation in several states of India. And then in the case of Rajasthan, works under a franchise model, and which also receives a 40% subsidy for some of these franchisees for new machinery. We chose the state of Rajasthan in the northwestern part of India, since this was the main state where the company was operating at that time with 30 franchisees. And we used a multidisciplinary approach, mixing quantitative and qualitative methods with farmer survey, interviews, and net process mappings and focus groups. The idea of the business model is as follows. So the farmers can reach EM3, this company, through a mobile app, ideally, through a call center, or by filling a form. Then this request goes to the company headquarters, and then the headquarters also look for the closest franchisee that can, at the same time, go back to the farmer and provide the service. And for this, the company developed a digital platform. This digital platform, as you can see here, allows to see several information about the farmers, for instance, what kind of machinery they need, the price charged for the operation, the name of the farmer, the plot size, and so on. However, we realized that this app only allowed to connect the headquarters of the company with the franchisees. That means that farmers were not able at that time still to place the request themselves, which was actually a problem. We also realized that the company operates, of course, in competition with other providers, which are, for instance, the contractors, private contractors, some farmer groups, and informal sharing. And we try to compare how these providers also perform for different types of farmers. And we also realized that the company is mainly working with the larger farmers. You can see that, for instance, 17% of the clients were the largest farmers, whereas just 5% were the marginal farmers, which was actually the core or the goal of the company, or to prove by our study. Also, we tried to assess the access to ICT, and we saw that in this area, most of the requests take place either by calling, like by telephone, or by informal talks. But there was no evidence of contacting by SMS messages or by an app. Also, we realized that the rate of using a smartphone was quite low among the marginal smallholder farmers, which reached around 23 or 27%. Well, it was, of course, a bit higher for larger farmers. So these 2 points were quite a limitation for the business model. The main conclusions we got from this study were threefold. So the first one is that indeed EM3 was successful in setting up a structure for provision, a more formal structure for service provision, since some features such as land measurement was very useful. Already farmers and also mechanization providers knew how big the plots were, for instance. They also were able to access funding or create business networks, but still, the potentials, we will say, they are still there to be proved because the digital platform was not still fully operating, and there was a subsidy in place. That means the whole business model was somehow disrupted by the subsidy. And in the end, we also think that Uberization seemed to offer some benefits, but still doesn't offer some solution for some key challenges, which are of course, the farmers' digital gap, the lack of advanced machinery, and the lack of training among the operators. So those are the main findings of the research. Thank you very much for your attention.
Dear participants, it is my great pleasure to deliver the laudatio for this year's Hans Hartwig Rutenberg Graduate Award. I would like to thank the members of the jury. Besides myself, this is Professor Ulrike Grote from the Institute of Environmental Economics and World Trade at the Leibniz University in Hanover, and Professor Dr. Jochen Reif from the Department of Breeding Research of the Leibniz Institute of Plant Genetics and Crop Plant Research in Gatersleben. I would like to mention that we follow a strict conflict of interest policy in this jury. So whenever one of the jury members is involved in any way in the supervision of a candidate, that jury member will not participate in any discussion or decision-making on that candidate. This year, we received 8 applications, and the level of the submissions was really very high. 5 of the 8 applications made it to our shortlist, and we really had a hard time to select the 3 winners. However, I would like to mention, even though more applications are more work for the jury, I would really like to encourage all master students who hopefully participate here through the video conference. Please, if you have an excellent master thesis, submit your application to this award. It's a very important award, and we would certainly be happy to have an even wider selection of applications. And also for the colleagues, for the professors, please encourage your excellent master students to submit applications to this award. We had a good mix in several respects. Out of these 8 applications, 3 were from male and 5 were from female graduates. We also had different nationalities among the applicants, which is also something that we value very much. We also had a mix of disciplines. We had economics, nutrition, crop sciences. And we would also encourage, we always have a bit of a bias in these disciplines. We explicitly would also encourage in the future to have also submissions from livestock or agricultural engineering and related fields. We received the following documents about these applications: the thesis, a separate summary of the thesis, an application letter, the curriculum vitae, a transcript of the candidate, and a recommendation letter, usually from the supervisor. And then as a jury, we thoroughly examine these documents and we apply the following criteria. First, we look at scientific excellence, and we are not just looking relative to each other, but first, our first round of selection is really what is the absolute level of scientific evidence and excellence, and this is how we had the 5 of the 8 in our shortlist. But then we also look what is the relevance to global food security, because this is obviously what the founders of this award were valuing the most. We also were looking at how innovative and creative are the applications. We also look at the curriculum vitae, to what extent they reflect the dedication of the applicants to using research in support of achieving global food security. And also we look at to what extent does the research reflect the spirit of this great professor after whom this award is named, the Hans Hartwig Rutenberg Award. He was a professor here at Hohenheim, as Dr. Fadani has already explained to us. He published this famous book, Farming Systems in the Tropics, and he prefaced it with a quote from ethnologist Clifford Geertz that says, "Seek complexity and order it." And I think that our award winners all did that. First, they actually got into this very complex fields, and then they used, just like Hans Rutenberg did, they used a sound theoretical framework and good empirical research to come up with relevant and new insights. Yeah, and that is what all our 3 award winners did. And just like Hans Rutenberg, they didn't take it easy. Hans Rutenberg never took it easy. He actually, I think one of the big inspirations for him was that he went to the field. He actually lived for 2 years in Kenya, and then he even cultivated crops in his own backyard just to understand how much work is it actually to figure out what the economics of these farming systems are. And our award winners also, they actually, based on field work, as we have seen from the presentations, came up with their understanding. And of course, all 3 award winners have a very clear relevance to food security. And another important aspect, we believe, especially also in this year's applications and in case of our 3 award winners, they look at developments that are very important if we think about the future and future challenges. One is, which couldn't be presented here, was looking at the issue of labor migration and remittances. So that is a very important trend. And as we have seen, organic agriculture, that is a very important field looking forward, and also digitalization. So also looking forward, we have 3 excellent awards. Let me appreciate each of the award winners individually now. The first one, unfortunately, we could not hear. It is Sina Bierkamp from the Leibniz University of Hanover. Her supervisor is Professor Ulrike Grote, and as mentioned, she was not involved in the decision to select Sina Bierkamp. Sina Bierkamp's title is Assessing the Role of Natural Resource Extraction and its Determinants for Rural Households in Southeast Asia. The jury found that Sina Bierkamp conducted an excellent analysis of the relation between natural resource extraction by rural households in Vietnam and the remittances that these households receive. Migration and remittances play a very important role globally, and there is also quite a significant body of research on that issue. But the jury found that Sina Bierkamp identified an important knowledge gap, and this is the link between the remittances and the extraction of natural resources, so environmental effects and household food security. She used a sound theoretical framework, and she used advanced econometric methods by analyzing a comprehensive data set. And the jury found that her results provide important insights on the strategies that poor rural households in South Asia can use to ensure their livelihoods and food security without contributing at the same time to the overuse of natural resources. Our second award winner this year, we have actually listened to your presentation, Franziska Steinhübel. She has studied at the University of Passau, and her supervisor was Professor Dr. Michael Grimm. The title we have heard, Do Indonesian Consumers Value Organic Rice? And it was evidence from a willingness to pay experiment with randomized pricing. The jury found that you did a really excellent analysis of consumers' willingness to pay, and the jury in particular appreciated the method that you have presented here, because this is really a very advanced type of method, and using it under the circumstances where you did use it, the jury was very impressed by that. we also found that the topic that you identified is highly relevant because we know about the advantages of organic production, and a big bottleneck for the organic movement more broadly, not only in developing countries, also in industrialized countries, is on the consumption side. The consumer's willingness to pay is really quite a big bottleneck for a wider expansion of this farming system. So we found that your thesis also made a very important contribution to this broader question, which is of global relevance. And also your insights on how knowledge or the provision of knowledge can actually influence demand. We found that also very important for demand-oriented strategies to promote sustainable production of staple food. So the jury was really very impressed by your work. And the third award winner, Roberto Villalba. As I mentioned, I wasn't involved in the assessment, but I read the assessment now of my two colleagues from the jury. So the supervisor jointly with me was actually Dr. Thomas Daum, who is also here. And the Uberization, or Uber for tractors, the jury found is globally one of the most widely quoted example of using digital tools in smallholder farming systems in developing countries. And in the spirit of Hans Rutenberg, you actually went to the field and figured out what is really behind that. And that was really very enlightening because you found that the model works quite different from what everybody believes. So a very important insight. And the jury was particularly impressed by your combination of qualitative and quantitative research methods, and by the fact that also in the spirit of Hans Rutenberg, you used a sound theoretical framework to come up with your results. Also, the link to food security, the jury points out that smallholders often have very limited access to mechanization, and using digital tools to improve access to mechanization and therefore to improvements in labor productivity and income will also contribute to food security, especially in the case where you analyzed it in India. But also the findings are highly relevant for other developing countries where digital tools are currently discussed. So on behalf of the jury, I would like to congratulate all three prize winners for this year's Hans Hartwig Rutenberg Graduate Award. Thank you.
Let me hand over the certificates to the present award winners. So I would ask Franziska Steinhübel to join me here. The Foundation Fiat Panis Ulm, Germany honors Franziska Steinhübel with its Hans Hartwig Rutenberg Graduate Award 2020. The prize winner receives the amount of Euro 2,500 for the submitted work. Do Indonesian consumers value organic rice? Evidence from a willingness to pay experiment with randomizing pricing. I quote the jury. Franziska Steinhübel receives this award for her excellent analysis of consumers' willingness to pay for organic rice in Indonesia. She used a highly sophisticated methodological approach to identify to what extent urban households are willing to pay more for organic rice and how this willingness can be influenced by providing consumers with information about the benefits of organic rice. The thesis provides important knowledge on the role that demand-oriented strategy can play to promote sustainable production systems for staple food. Ulm, Hohenheim, September the 9th, 2020. The members of the jury and the executive director of the Foundation Fiat Panis. Congratulations.
Thank you.
This one also belongs to it, and the flower. I think mehr dürfen wir. Thank you.
Thank you.
Congratulations. Roberto, please join me. The Foundation Fiat Panis honors Roberto Villalba with its Hans-Hartwig Gutenberg Graduate Award. The prize winner receives the amount of euro 2,500 for his submitted work, The Uberization of Agriculture Mechanization Services, the case of EM3 Agri-Services in Rajasthan, India. I quote the jury, Mr. Villalba focused on small-scale producers with limited access to mechanization based on a solid theoretical approach and applying multiple qualitative and quantitative research methods. He shows with his excellent analysis that access to digital services enable farmers to increase labor productivity, income, and food security in India. Congratulations. This one also belongs to you. And we still like to make a photo, not too close, but.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Dear Volker Asch, we are ahead of time. Could we continue? You have to spend some more time. It's a pleasure for me also to present today the Josef Gabriel Knoll European Science Award. The Foundation Fiat Panis supports scientists whose work focus on helping to reduce hunger and malnutrition in developing countries. From 1986, and it was also based here in the first time, the award ceremonies here at this lecture hall. To 2009, the Iceland Foundation awarded the Science Prize every 2 years. Since 2010, the Foundation Fiat Panis succeeded with awarding the prize. It is named after Professor Dr. Josef Gabriel Knoll, a pioneer of tropical agriculture research in Germany, who worked in the 1950s at the FAO and was 1961 appointed by the University of Hohenheim on the newly established chair for tropical agriculture. The objective of this award is to encourage scientists to work on research findings which must be user-oriented and suitable to contribute towards improving the status of food and nutrition security. Eligible are individuals and teams whose members have not reached their 40th birthday by the application deadline and who have successfully completed a doctorate at a European university. The award will be issued throughout Europe and it's endowed with a total sum of 30,000 euro. An independent scientific jury decides on this award. Let me thank the jury, Professor Eva Schlecht, Professor Martin Keim, and Professor Matthias Becker for their intensive work to select the most successful works for this term. Again, the 3 award winners will now present their scientific work, which will be followed by the assessment of a member of our jury and the handover of the certificates. And here are the winners, and we have a special one. It is Dr. Adisu Fekatu Andeta, who is actually in Ethiopia, but he was quite clever enough to send us his video file with his presentation. So I hope technique works, and astonishingly, this Tropentag is based now on technology. So I hope that the Eric Thielkes is now giving us the chance to see the video of Dr. Andeta.
Hello, this is Adisu Fekadu, and I'm happy to present parts of my PhD research work entitled Optimization of Insect Fermentation physicochemical and microbial dynamics and development of starter cultures. Here is the presentation outline. Following a short introduction, I will discuss two of the major objectives from my PhD research work. And finally, I will discuss the major conclusions from the research work. As we come to the introduction part, insect or insect ventricosum is a multi-purpose food crop which is mainly grown in Ethiopia, and the plant is considered as a drought-tolerant food crop, and it serves as a staple food for more than 50 million Ethiopian people. And kocho is the main food product which is obtained from insect plants. So processing of insect for food, how it gets processed? The plant doesn't have edible fruits. As a result, the pseudostem and the core parts of the plant, both of them are processed traditionally using basic tools and squeezed and mixed and allowed to ferment for a minimum of 2 months. Then after completing the fermentation, then bread is baked from the fermented product, and kocho bread will be consumed with meat or cheese or milk or any other protein-rich food sources. So the focus of this PhD research work is on the fermentation process because we have a lot of challenges associated with the traditional insect fermentation aspect. So why we need to optimize the fermentation process? We identified two major challenges with respect to insect fermentation. The first one is challenges with the fermentation itself, and the second is challenges related to the fermentation system. For the first case, we don't have well-defined starter culture to enhance insect fermentation. As a result, we have a longer fermentation time and variable sensory quality. And we have also high loss. 24 to 45% of the processed insect is lost due to poor fermentation. That's because we have a blackening of the product. That's mainly due to oxidation or mold growth. It mainly causes food wastage. The second major challenge is the fermentation system. The traditional fermentation systems, which are pits and erosa, they are the predominantly used fermentation systems in insect growing regions in Ethiopia. They are not completely anaerobic. Insects can easily access them, and there is also waterlogging problem, and seeing contamination with soil is also another challenge. So to solve these problems, we designed two different experiments. The first experiment was examination of the effects of fermentation systems on physicochemical and microbial dynamics. So in order to achieve this problem, we took the predominantly used fermentation systems, which is erosa and peat, and for the first time, we introduced sauerkraut jars to ferment insects. Therefore, we processed insect plant and we kept it in the three systems, and we monitored physicochemical and microbial dynamics for 3 months. So what we obtained is that for the pH value, we observed a steady pH reduction for the jar fermentation system. However, there is unusual pH increase for the peat and erosa fermentation system, which is the result of undesirable or poor fermentation during the entire fermentation period. For the microbial count, we considered 6 microbial groups. However, I will only show you one of them, which is Clostridium spore count. So we have the log CFU per gram, and we have the sampling days, and we observed lower Clostridium spore counts for the jar fermentation systems. However, we have higher Clostridium spore count on the peat and erosa fermentation systems as compared with the jar fermentation system. As you know, Clostridium species contain food pathogenic and spoilage microorganisms. Therefore, their presence is undesirable in the fermentation. From the metagenetic analysis, we came to know that we have large number of lactic acid bacteria, especially at the end of the fermentation, which is comparable with the plate count. We also observed Clostridium species on the peat fermentation system, which is but not for the erosa and jar fermentation system, which is mainly due to the relative high abundance on the soil. And the second objective was to isolate and select microorganisms for starter culture development. So In order to achieve this objective, what we did is that we screened 158 MRS grown isolates based on their biochemical and physiological characteristics, and we obtained 3 potential candidates. Then the 3 candidates were evaluated both under laboratory and the field condition. And for the field experiment, we monitored physicochemical and microbial dynamics for about 75 days. Then after 75 days, we conducted sensory analysis with the involvement of the local people. So what we obtained is that out of the 3 isolates, 2 of them were Lactobacillus plantarum, and the third one is Liconostoc mesenteroides. So we processed insect and inoculated with the 3 isolates. So what we observed is that we have a fast pH reduction and colonization of insect mass for the inoculated insect sample. However, we also observed lower Clostridium spore count for the inoculated insect mass than that of the uninoculated. The sensory analysis also showed that Kocho, which is inoculated with the 3 isolates, are much preferred by the local people than that of the uninoculated mass. As you know, as you can see it in the slide, Kocho, which is black in color, is not preferred by the local people, so it's which is not inoculated. But the inoculated one is much preferred by the local people. So the general conclusion is that insect, for the first time we came to know that insect can be fermented in a sauerkraut jar. Sauerkraut jar are really, they reduce the risks of unwanted microorganisms. It also saves 24 to 45% of the processed insect. As you know, while we are fermenting insect in a sauerkraut jar, we don't have blackening of the product, so we will save more fermented insect. The 3 isolates are also suitable to be used as a starter culture. It also ensures fast and safe fermentation. It also improves the sensory character. I would like to thank this institution for their support during my PhD study. Thank you for your attention.
Which one is the right one?
Ja. Mhm. This one. Yeah. Okay. Good afternoon. First of all, I'm really feeling deeply honored to be awarded with this prize today. In particular, when reading the list of previous award winners, many of which are really well-known scientists today who have dedicated their lives towards the fight against hunger in the world. So this is both a great honor to me, but also a great obligation for my future work. I'm awarded for my work on using smartphones to collect data in agricultural households. This is a case study from Zambia. Now, I think we can all agree on the importance of good data from households. This is really key to reduce hunger and poverty in the world. As scientists, we need good data for our research. Policymakers need good data to prioritize and design policy instruments. We need good data to target the right people who are suffering, for example, from hunger and malnutrition. And we need good data to monitor progress. Now, data collection itself can be challenging in areas where few households keep records. So everything what you want to find out from households, you need to ask them, which can be unreliable, and in areas where literacy is low. And data collection is in particular challenging in moments of crisis, just as now during COVID-19, we cannot go to some areas due to travel restrictions. Now, for economic data, digital tools have been increasingly used to enhance data accuracy. We have heard about examples of using satellites to assess yields in the first keynote speak. Other digital tools are GPS devices, for example, that help to validate plot sizes. For socioeconomic data, researchers continue to mostly rely on surveys, which can be prone to recall bias, and this can be substantial in some cases. Just to name one example, this is a study from the World Bank in Tanzania. Farmers reported to work 4 times less when they were asked on a weekly basis rather than at the end of the farming season. This is really an order of magnitude that makes calculating labor productivity very difficult, for example. There are similar studies on consumption patterns and on nutrition also, always pointing to high recall bias. Now, at the same time, in the last couple of years, we have seen this rapid spread of mobile and smartphones in developing countries. And for this dissertation that I'm awarded for, I was exploring whether we can somehow participate from that trend and use apps to collect self-recorded data in agricultural households, thereby improving data accuracy. For this, we have developed a smartphone application ourselves, which allows respondents to record time use and nutrition data in real time with the help of 88 illustrations. So whenever a respondent starts to do an activity, he or she would click on a smartphone application that we have given to them on land phones. They click on that icon, and whenever they stop an activity, they click on that activity again, and it stops recording. So we collect data in real time. We also are able to collect data on nutrition, for example, on which type of food groups were eaten. Having this data in real time, by definition, minimizes recall bias because nothing is recalled. And we avoid literacy bias because we only use illustrations. This application has been developed in a participatory development process with farmers from Zambia. And I think this was really one of the key factors to have made this work. We have then both tested and used the application for data collection in Zambia, in particular in the eastern province of Zambia. Here, literacy is relatively low, just 50%. So really using these pictorial elements, these illustrations, made a lot of sense. Otherwise, this is a rather typical smallholder farming setting with widespread poverty, low incomes per day, is mixed farming mainly on 2 hectares of land, using very few inputs other than fertilizer, which is heavily subsidized. We have randomly selected 62 households in this eastern province, and we followed those households throughout the whole season. In the second keynote, Helen Young was highlighting the importance of really capturing seasonality. So we collected data for 3 days at 5 points of time throughout the whole season. And we collected data from different family members, the head, the spouse, and either son or daughter. In my dissertation, I'm asking and answering 3 research questions. One is, can apps help to collect time use and nutrition data? And here the answer is yes, they can. If you have a well-designed and carefully introduced smartphone application, this works very well. In our case, respondents from 7 to 93 years age were able to enter data. I'm not going into detail more, but this has been published, so you can read more on this yourself. This is open access. The second paper out of the dissertation has also been published, so I'm not going into detail either. This is how accurate the data that we have collected is, in particular compared to 24-hour recall questions. And we find high levels of accuracy, both when looking at random cross-checks and when comparing it with this recall data. The third paper, which is about to be published, looks then at how time use, for example, differs with agricultural mechanization. I'm not going into detail either here just because of time, but I want to give you a bit of a flavor of the type of data that we have collected. As I said, we followed 62 households throughout the farming seasons. Of those, 20 were mainly using hand tools for cultivation, 20 were using animal traction, and then 22 were using tractors for land preparation. And now they are also differing by wells and so on. In the dissertation, we control for such covariates, but I'm keeping it a bit simpler here, just to give you some ideas on how the data looks like. For example, we can see for land preparation, for these different categories of households, that those in manual households really spend a significant amount of time doing those activities, around 2 hours, 2.5 hours for male and female every day doing this activity. And this really declines then when we move towards more mechanized households. And it's in particular women who are benefiting from this. Also men, but to a lesser extent. We have collected data on a lot of different activities, for example, also on domestic chores and care activities, which are activities like these, like caring of a child or washing or cooking. Here we see a different pattern. Here we see really this huge amount of time that women spend doing these activities. 5-6 hours every day. Men spend very little amount of time doing those activities. Perhaps surprisingly, both boys and girls do also spend a considerable amount on these activities. As I said, we also collect data on nutrition and using these food groups, 12 food groups. So here we see, for example, that those who are using tractors, partly because they are simply more wealthy, have a better dietary diversity. This is just to give an idea on the type of data that we collect. We collect that throughout the season, so there are a lot of interesting patterns one can see. We can also translate the time use data in how much energy, for example, respondents actually need, which is another important element of our fight against hunger. To have a bit of an outlook, we find a really large and mostly untapped potential to use apps to collect self-recorded data in agricultural households. For example, this type of real-time monitoring that one can use can be used to track development interventions, what is their impact on time use, but also nutrition. One could also add different types of questions. And this can also be used to see how households respond to shocks, how resilient are they. For example, now we talk about COVID-19, how does this affect the nutrition of the households? We can also think of droughts or locusts, which are a big problem currently at the Horn of Africa. The smartphone application clearly can be expanded to allow respondents to make pictures, for example. And taken together, we feel that this really opens new and mainly transdisciplinary digital research pathways. For example, one could think about a revival of village studies that were really a big thing in the 1980s, where researchers from different disciplines came together in one village and studied aspects together. Using tools like the smartphone application that we have developed, one could think of creating digital twins of such villages and also test different interventions then. All in all, this clearly resonates with the concept of citizen science. In our case, we mainly state at this certain base level of using citizens as sensors, so they were entering data for us. But in future work, we want to go beyond that and also collaborate already during problem formulation and data analysis. With that, I want to thank all of the partners, all of the farmers, and anyone involved in this study. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. Okay. Yes, I would also like to start with my thanks to the Fiat Panis Foundation for receiving this prize, which is a big honor and it's a big push for my young career as a postdoc at the University of Hohenheim. I did my PhD at Humboldt University, and I can only agree with you, Thomas, that the list of previous award recipients is very impressive and is actually, yeah, it's a push, I would say. My dissertation is titled Economy-Wide Modeling of Seasonal Labor and Natural Resource Policies. It consisted of 4 studies. 3 of them were focused on empirical research questions using economy-wide models. And another one was focusing on the relevance of seasonal labor markets for economy-wide models, which was answering a methodological research question. And that one I would like to present in the following. And I would like to start with, if it works. Just the next slide. Not so difficult. I would like to start with a quote from a very famous economist, Amartya Sen, who said that agriculture being a seasonal operation, it is somewhat misleading to speak in terms of a homogeneous unit of labor. A unit of labor at the time of harvesting is not replaceable by a unit of labor at a slack period. The problem of seasonality, it's well known in agriculture. It's also well known to agriculture economists like me. But as you will see, it has not reached all the methods that we are using in agriculture economics. When we look at the micro level, at household or farm models or multi-agent models, yes, we know seasonality matters. There it's accounted for, and we know if we leave it out, if we do not include seasonality, we distort model outcomes. However, those models do not capture the whole economy. The labor market is not included. The government and trade is not included. So therefore, we need economy-wide models. These models incorporate all agents within an economy. Problem is, they so far, surprisingly to me as a young PhD researcher, they have not considered seasonality of labor. So they assume that labor units are homogeneous within a year. They assume that we can take winter labor to be used in a harvesting season, let's say, end of September, and we take the time from December, right? It doesn't make a lot of sense, but they assume it. And of course, it's a very obvious question, research question, that does seasonality of labor matter for economy-wide models? Because those models are widely used in research in academia and in development organizations. For instance, the World Bank is using them widely, IFPRI is using them, of course, University of Hohenheim, and they are used in the context of agrarian economies where often more than half of the population is engaged in labor-intensive smallholder agriculture. I addressed this question using a case study of Bhutan. You might know Bhutan. It's a small country in South Asia. It's landlocked. It's a country where more than 50% of the population is working in agriculture and where small holdings are very small, about 1 hectare. And there I collected data on seasonal time use of rural households. I wish I had Thomas' app back then, yeah. Unfortunately, I didn't have. Yeah? So I conducted labor calendar surveys in 3 agroecological zones. And here you can see a few pictures of me doing that. Then I had to use this database to incorporate into a model. And I extended computable general equilibrium models, CGE models, very well known. And in there, many modifications. I will focus on one. I integrated seasonal labor demand into nested production functions. And when we talk about that, or when we think about that, we have to bear in mind that there are 3 different types of activities. For instance, rigid activities such as rice production, as Volker would probably know. We cannot decide when we are doing transplanting of rice. Yeah? There's a certain time. In Bhutan, it's doing May or July, May or June. Yeah? Also, harvesting is very rigid. There's almost no flexibility. In livestock, I don't see Mitzig anymore, but he would probably agree there is a little bit of flexibility when it comes to slaughtering or hay production, but still animals have to be fed every day. And then there are flexible activities. As you can see on this picture here, women collecting lemongrass in Bhutan. There you have some flexibility. Forestry activities are done in winter. Textile weaving is something. If you think about Germany in the Black Forest, people used crafted wood to produce those famous clocks. That was done in wintertime. I then used this model and I compared the seasonal model to the traditional, I would call annual model. And I used both model types to simulate a scenario in which we would face, in which Bhutan would face an export ban by India. That would mean Bhutan cannot import any cereals anymore from India. And that is quite significant because Bhutan relies on more than 90% of its imports from India. So that would stimulate, or that would increase the cereal import price in Bhutan by 36%. That is a simple markup through higher transportation costs and higher trade margins. When we do this in a model that does not include seasonality, we only get one wage response. Wage response we see because farmers would now produce more cereals inside of Bhutan in order to cope with the shock. And then we would see, okay, rural labor wages go up by 2.8% throughout the year flat. That would be the, let's say, the normal model. If we then do it with the seasonal model that I have developed, we of course see that there is a pattern. We would see wage spikes in, for instance, June when rice paddy is transplanted, or in November when it's harvested. That is when the labor demand is going up. And that is when cereals have their, when usually we have labor peaks and shortage of labor because of cereal production. This is something that, of course, means this represents those seasonal labor bottlenecks, which constrain production that we know, but now we can show it in the model. And does it matter? One could ask. Yes, it matters, because we see that without seasonality, we would overestimate the supply response by 30% in the annual model. Hence, we would strongly overestimate the supply response if we neglect seasonality. And of course, these biased results have implications for policy analysis and for analysis of food security. I'm already at the end. I'm wrapping up. I was told I have 8 minutes, but then today it seems like we have a little bit more of time. So I will spend a little bit of what can we do with this research. I presented the methodological research, and I showed you the key message is that neglecting seasonality of labor results in a systematic bias of economy-wide model results in labor-intensive smallholder agriculture systems, which are, of course, very prevalent in the tropics. And with now this model development, I think we can do a lot of interesting work because it contributes to the bridging of the micro-macro gap, and it also allows a better representation of rural livelihoods in those kind of models. Now, for instance, I was able to model seasonal underemployment with this kind of model development. We can model questions of seasonal migration, changes in production technologies at a larger scale. Bhutan is thinking of going 100% organic. That would mean labor demand for weeding, for animal manuring in certain seasons would go up strongly. And of course, this would mean that a seasonal model would react very differently than those, let's say, traditional model setups without seasonality. This morning, or not this morning, but I think 1.5 hours ago, Professor Sauerborn told us about climate change-induced heat stress in the tropics. This is a big topic. It's not only about the impacts on crop yields. If we have lower labor productivity during certain times, agriculture production will also be impacted. And here again, the problem is so far the analysis I have seen do not account for seasonality in those economy-wide model setups. And here I'm in contact with the Norwegian Center for Climate Change, where a colleague works, that we're going to do a little study on showing how results would differ if one would include seasonality. Last but not least, of course, we all are impacted by the pandemic, and the impacts of a pandemic on smallholder agriculture can be very different whether we have a lockdown during the lean season when everybody is, let's say, at home, or whether we have a lockdown during the harvest season. If we go back to 2014 to the Ebola crisis, of course, Ebola is much worse than COVID, I think we all agree. Farmers did not go to the fields because of fear of contagion. So the rice harvest basically collapsed. So actually everything is known, but of course we need to link it to those economy-wide models, and we need to try to avoid the biases that we are otherwise would be exposed to. So let me thank you all for listening, and of course questions are always welcome. And once more, my gratitude for for this prize. Thank you.
Yes, ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the jury, I want to congratulate this year's Joseph Knoll European Science Award winners, whom we have just seen and heard. And this year's awards winners were selected out of a total of 6 eligible applications. And I want to join my colleague Regina Birner in inviting all scientists, in our case, the PhD scientists who have successfully completed a thesis dealing with food security and nutrition, to submit their application to the 2022 award, because even though it's a bit of work, we like to read more than just theses. So 10, 15, we can really deal with. We are 3 people on this committee. So my colleagues, Professor Matthias Becker from the Chair of Plant Nutrition in Bonn, Professor Martin Keim from the Chair of International Food Economics and Rural Development in Göttingen, and myself, Eva Schlecht, chairing the group of animal husbandry in the tropics and subtropics at Kassel and Göttingen universities. Coming now to the criteria that led us to choose these 3 theses, they are basically the same that you have already encountered when Professor Birner was presenting the Rutenberg laureates. So I don't want to repeat them. I want to just briefly deal with the 3 candidates and their theses. So our first prize winner, Dr. Adiso Fekadu Andeta, did his PhD research from 2015 to 19 at the Catholic University of Leuven in Belgium under the supervision of Professor Leen van Kampenhout. And his BSc in biology he obtained at Jimma University, his MSc in genetics at Haramaya University, both in Ethiopia. In between the master's and the PhD study, he served as a director of biodiversity research and conservation center at Abermynch University. And now, after the PhD, he returned to Abermynch University and serves there currently as a lecturer and scientist. The thesis, entitled Optimization of NSAID Fermentation, Physiochemical and Microbial Dynamics and Development of Starter Cultures, was selected based on the following criteria or insights that we as jury members gained. We were impressed by the very topical analysis of the physicochemical and microbial dynamics that occur during the NSAID fermentation, and you have seen that from the presentation, a very bulky work on the microbiology during this fermentation process, and also by the development of improved fermentation approaches. So a combination of basic science and quite advanced basic science, plus very applied research and participatory research. And this combination of fundamental and participatory research was then also successful in addressing the issues of food safety, in the reduction of food losses, and also in the development of practices that ease women's task of NSAID processing, because, which was not part of the thesis, Dr. Andetta also developed a tool that facilitates NSAID pressing. Yeah, so this combination of in-depth research and stakeholder involvement and practical application has really convinced us. Plus, of course, the results have been published in excellent journals and have also been implemented practically with the stakeholders, with the women in different communities across Ethiopia. The take-home message that we as jury gained from the thesis is that the improved NSAID fermentation approach or approaches do increase food safety, reduce food losses, and really also improve the sensory characteristics of the koto bread, which is the product, the end product of the fermentation process. Coming now to Dr. Thomas Daum, here present with us. He did his PhD research from 2015 to 19 here in Hohenheim under supervision of Professor Birner. The BA in Business Administration he obtained at the Duale Hochschule Mannheim and an MSc in Agricultural Economics here at Hohenheim University. In addition to his academic career, he also was involved in development projects and private sector engagements and has worked in the fields of land use policy, climate change adaptation, and precision agriculture, not only in African countries, but also in Germany and in some Asian countries. And currently he's a postdoc at the section Social and Institutional Change in Agricultural Development at the Hans Ruthenberg Institute here in Hohenheim. The thesis, the potential of smartphone apps to collect self-recorded data in agricultural households, a study on time use in Zambia, did impress us as a jury because we all know, not only the economists, but also the livestock people and the plant scientists, that if we want to determine time allocation to different tasks that are to be fulfilled by households, it's very difficult, and what we obtain is often very shaky data, not very reliable. So this smartphone app developed by Dr. Daum really seems to enable precise recording of working time and also of consumer behavior. And that, of course, this multifunctional use of the app is very intriguing. In addition, the data that has been then acquired helps to improve modeling and decision-making, which is related to labor and time allocation. And we have seen in the talks the link to the third thesis could be made in future by using this app. And what was really impressing us was that this scientific question of how to accurately capture time allocation or consumer information was addressed in a simplified but not trivial way. And this is also arts, to communicate science in a way that people understand it at different levels. The stakeholders in the field, the stakeholders in the ministries, but also the peer community. So that was really a very, good achievement. We appreciated that very much. And also, of course, the results were published in high-ranked journals. We saw that Dr. Daum is strongly committed to transdisciplinary research with a scientific as well as practical impact and implication, and this was convincing us. The take-home message would be, I think, that digitization opens up new pathways for the rural households, but also for scientists and policymakers alike to understand and improve the time and nutrition constraints at the local to the regional scales. The third prize winner, Dr. Arndt Feuerbacher has completed his PhD research at Humboldt University, where he was dealing with his research from 2014 to 19 under the supervision of Professor Harald Grete. He obtained an MBA in International Business and Business Administration at Reutlingen and Portland State Universities, and an MSc in Agricultural Economics at the University of Hohenheim. He has already done several World Bank consultancies for economic analysis and environmental degradation studies across Asia, so beyond Bhutan also, and in South America, and currently is postdoc at the Institute of Agricultural Policies and Markets at Hohenheim University. The thesis, entitled Economy-Wide Modeling of Seasonal Labor and Natural Resource Policies, was also highly appreciated by the jury. We did not do a ranking, by the way. We just sort of appreciated all three theses in a similar way, but we saw the differences. So here we were impressed by the very detailed and excellent approach, methodologically as well as empirically, to model this labor seasonality, which is really tricky. And in addition to the labor seasonality, also questions of trade and environmental policies were addressed in your thesis. The applicability of this model beyond the agricultural sector and also beyond the Bhutan case study was, of course, convincing us. We see the need of dealing with seasonality of labor. And 3 of the papers that emerged from the thesis were published in very high quality journals. What also impressed the jury was that you were not part of a well-funded research project, but you had to acquire the funds for your fieldwork and for your stakeholder dialogues and so on from various donors, and you were very successful in it. So it was a self-funded research work that was really impressive as well. And your achievements show really the result of a very independent planning and implementation of your research questions and a very strong social commitment as well. The take-home message is that livelihood impact of the policies vary greatly when acknowledging or ignoring labor market seasonality, and the respective simulation results are of high political relevance. We congratulate all 3 of you very sincerely. You really deserve this Joseph G. Knoll European Science Award.
I know that Dr. Andetta is following us from Ethiopia, so congratulations, Dr. Andetta. Your certificate is signed and you will receive it. Ethiopia is quite a bit difficult to reach actually, but you will get it. Thomas. Let me hand over the certificate. The Foundation Fiat Panis Germany honors Dr. Thomas Daum with its Joseph Gabriel Knoll European Science Award 2020. The prize winner receives the amount of euro 10,000 for the submitted work, the potential of smartphone apps to collect self-recorded data in agriculture households, a study on time use in Zambia. Dr. Daum is awarded the prize for his excellent research and methodological contribution to developing an innovative approach for data collection in the tropics. His development of a new smartphone app is a significant contribution, allowing more precise recording of time use and food consumption behavior among poor rural populations. These methods can make a significant contribution to improving databases for research and policy making, thus being of highest relevance for farmers' livelihoods and their food safety and security. Ulm, Stuttgart, September the 9th, 2020, the members of the jury and the executive director of the Foundation Fiat Panis. Congratulations. The Foundation Fiat Panis Germany honors Dr. Arndt Feuerbacher with its Josef Gabriel Knoll European Science Award. The prize winner receives the amount of 10,000 euro for his submitted work, Economy-Wide Modeling of Seasonal Labor and Natural Resource Policies. Dr. Feuerbacher is awarded the prize for his methodological and empirically excellent research work on economic-wide modeling, especially integrating seasonality. His research links labor market and natural policies. Exciting and innovative combination with high policy relevance in Bhutan and beyond. The modeling of various policy scenarios is of high practical relevance for millions of poor people living in the tropics. His social commitment during the research work is also highly recognized. Ulm, Stuttgart, September 9th, 2020, the members of the jury and the executive director. Congratulations, Dr. Feuerbacher. There's still one photo needed. Again, thank you very much to the Tropentag that we were able in the normal way to present our award winners. I think this is a big achievement for the Tropentag that we were able to do this today. Thank you very much, Dr. Volker Dasch.
Yeah, thank you, Andrea Fardani, for this very nice session, and again for an excellent choice of candidates. Congratulations to the jury as well. That was very interesting, and congratulations to my colleagues here from Hohenheim. That is also makes me proud to be in Hohenheim again. We're producing very nice offspring, and I think that's worth it. Yeah. So unfortunately, we don't get this Tosender Applaus here, unfortunately, but no, 66 people at least. Huh? So there's one thing I would like to do before we close the session, and I still have 4 minutes to do so, thanks to a very swift session of the Fiat Panis Foundation here. I would like to point out that even a digital Tropentag doesn't come for free. Yeah? You may have paid 20 euros of conference fee, and fortunately we have about 700 participants, but it's an easy calculation that with this little amount of money, you cannot run a show like this. And so we have a couple of very dear and also very true sponsors I would like to mention here. First of all, the GIZ and BEAF via the BMZ, they are financing us with 15,000 euros, and this already for many, many years. And I think this is a very good contribution. Secondly, another ministry via the BLE is our Ministry of Agriculture that is financing this Tropentag. Again, although it is virtual, with 15,000 euros, and is helping us to support young people and to have that show running. So again, thank you very much. Also, this is a contribution that we are having already for several years, and that's very, very welcome. Among the bigger donors is also the Fiat Panis Foundation with 4,000 euros for this Tropentag, which helps us to also establish this kind of session here and actually have a presence and these kind of things. And so overall, a very big thanks to Fiat Panis Foundation, who has been a true sponsor of the Tropentag for many, many years as well. So I only mentioned these three. Yes, give them a hand. There are a few more smaller donors, but still, without them, we could not actually do this Tropentag, particularly not this one. Yeah. Also, the others are expensive, and we have a lot of issues. We always try to keep it cheap. We always try to keep it affordable for students, and we put a lot of the money that we are receiving into supporting student participation. So students who do not present anything here join us for free. And very often also for the major Tropentags, students pay only a marginal fee, and we want this so that these people, these students, our offspring, very early offspring, not these mature guys here, but I mean those very young ones, that they actually join us from the very beginning and see what can be achieved. And I think you are a very good example of what can be achieved. And maybe you have joined the Tropentag very early. I know at least Thomas, I have seen him for years already. So he has been in contact with the community, and maybe that helped. And if we are able to continue this kind of conference, then because of consequent attendance of our networks, but also because of a very generous and continuous funding of our activities. And I would just like to point this out here. And with this, I'm closing our second afternoon session and point out that we have parallel oral sessions going on that will not be presented here in this lecture hall, but will be online, and you can join via Wova and see what the other people have to say. There are some very interesting sessions already up, and they will start in about half an hour. And we will have tonight, for all the ATSAF members, we have our ATSAF members assembly. Don't forget, anyone who is an ATSAF member and has not received a link yet to that meeting may contact me. I will send the link immediately. So thank you very much. We see each other again on Friday here in this lecture hall. And if anyone is interested in abiotic stresses, I also have a session that I'm chairing on that topic. So you're very welcome to join me there. Thank you very much. Thank you, and see you on Friday.